My apologies for the intermittent connection. I will continue from here. As I was saying, the issue with the current policy is that we were discussing the new education policy 2020, and we were specifically discussing the expansion of early childhood care and education, and the revision of the Right to Information Act, so that now covering from pre-KG right up to the high school, higher secondary school, that is +2, it will be revised so that it is possible for and correspondingly Right to Education Act will also be revised, so that instead of 14 years as it is now, it will be expanded till 18 years, and from instead of 6 to 14 years it will be expanded from 3 to 18 years. So this is a big move, and it is a very welcome move, a long pending. In fact, initially when the first Right to Education Act was being debated, at that time itself this demand was being made, but unfortunately which was not included at that time. This is a very welcome proposal. Secondly, the major change that is going to happen is the revision of the format of school education. Currently we have 10th +2 format of education. It will be revised to be 5 + 3 + 3 + 4. That is the early period, early childhood period, which will be called the foundational period. That would be the 5 years, starting from 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then from ages 8 onwards 3 years, and then followed by another 3 years, and then till the 8th standard, and then the 4 years, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th. So this is again a revision of format. There have been critiques about it, and then there have been affirmation about it. As such, it's not a problematic aspect, because the current foundation of dragging studies all till 10th before there is a marker. Instead of that, starting from pre-KG, formal education system, continuing with first 5 years, followed by 3 years of primary education, followed by another 3 years of middle school, followed by secondary education of 4 years. That's much more better thing. But here is the danger in this system. There is a possibility that students who are not able to cope up for various reasons, because of their financial situation, or because of their household situation, or any other of those aspects, this gives much more possibility for them to exit the system at multiple points, either after the first 5 years or after the first subsequent 3 years or subsequent 3 years, like that. However, if it is being implemented with sincerity, it could prove to be a very good move on the part of the for the Indian education system and for the students. Apart from this, there has been a mention in the policy on improving the PTR, people teachers ratio. As we know, many schools in India currently are having problem of high PTR, people teacher ratio, in which sometimes 80, 100 or more than that, one teacher handles up to 80 students or 100 students or more. So in this, again, there is a reformation that at least 25 to 30, not beyond that, will be allowed, and if implemented, that would be a very good thing. And to make this happen, the policy does talk about hiring a lot of teachers, skilled teachers, expanding the teacher base, so that this becomes possible. Similarly, another good thing about this policy is that it does talk about strengthening the infrastructure, and secondly, universalizing the participation in school education system, so that it is possible that students as well as teachers are provided with a proper environment to enable proper studies. And along with this, there is a talk of multiple pathways. That is, there is the formal education system integrating the non-regular or the non-mainstream schools, such as schooling system of various communities, religious schools, integrating them so that it is possible to transition from those streams into the mainstream, as well as expanding national open school NIOS, and updating it to match the format of the current system, so that it is easy for people who are homeschooling, it is easy for people who are currently having difficulty to attend regular schools. They can in fact can utilize this opportunity, like National Institute of Open Schooling, etc., on par with the current system, and they can take part. Similarly, it talks about holistic development, and it talks about of ethical, moral education, sports, culture, everything along with that. And along with that, it also talks about inculcating Indian values, and here is where it becomes a bit problematic. When the draft policy is talking about Indian values, and throughout, it's not only specific to school education, it talks about it with respect to the higher education, with respect to overall, the guiding directives of the policy. It frequently refers to Indian culture and particular background and particular form of Indian values. This is the big problem there, because India, as we know, is a plural country. It is made up of a number of ethnic communities, linguistic communities, religious communities, and all of them together form India. And the real representation of India and Indian values lies in its plurality. Talks about every single community makes India. There is no such thing as any one Indian community. Rather, every single community that constitutes India and Indian social fabric, every single one of them is a constituent part of what qualifies as the Indian culture, Indian values, and all their values are Indian values, all their ethos are Indian ethos. They all make up the cultural milieu of India, and to particularly reduce it to one community is a very problematic notion, and this is a very recurrent problem throughout this thing. And in fact, given the government's background of maintaining a particular community, that is that it has, this frequent alluding to a particular understanding, interpretation, and representation of certain things. This is a very problematic notion. India, as we know, and as it is enshrined in the Constitution of India, is something that is representative of whole Indian cultural plurality, religious plurality, linguistic plurality, and it is indivisible. Trying to divide it into or reduce it into any one part is a very problematic notion. And the policy, again, with school education, it talks about bringing in a particular Indian ethos and inculcating them in the students. This is again a very problematic notion, which the civil society has to seriously take up and try to lobby with the government not to let this happen, but rather it should be something that should be representative of India as a whole. These are the problems in the school education in brief. With respect to higher education, we have a number of other issues, like some of the positive things. This policy, like the policies before, does talk about and reiterate the importance of government spending on education. Currently, as we know, India has a very low expenditure on education. It is India expends about close to something like 3% of its GDP, whereas for a robust education system to be robust and functioning properly, it needs anywhere between 6 to 8% of GDP to be spent on it. This policy does talk about 6% of GDP, but how will the government be allocating this resources, and from what sources and in which manner? The policy is not clear. But however, the fact that it does talk about bringing about 6% of GDP to be spent on education is a very welcome move. And it's specifically one area that it talks about increasing spending is research, and that is a very good policy decision. However, it has some negative connotation, which we will come to presently. Talking about higher education, one big thing is that it talks about a holistic and comprehensive education system. Again, it has a very selective understanding of what constitutes Indian ethos and values. Again, it talks about 64 kalas. Again, as we know, this is one part of what makes up the India, one particular community, one particular cultural stand that is part of a larger milieu that makes up the India. These are the thing. However, with respect to higher educational structure, it also talks about revising. Currently, we have 3 years bachelor courses, but it talks about, again, a multiple pathway 4-year bachelor courses, in which if somebody were to finish 1 year, they will have the option of exiting, and they will be given a certificate course. If they complete 2 years, they will be given a diploma course, and if they complete 3 years, they can opt for a graduation bachelor's degree. And if they complete 4 years, that it will have an additional research component. Then they will be graduating with 4 years comprehensive with research component added, and that would be this thing. Similarly, for MA, it talks about including if somebody were to complete 4 years of bachelor's, then 1 year of MA, or they can do 2 years of MA with research, in which case they can directly go to PhD. Similarly, there is also talk of a 5-year integrated program, that if a student were to complete all 5 years, then they will be graduating with 2 degrees, bachelor's as well as master's degree, and after that they can directly join for PhD. And this policy scraps the MPhil program, which is currently there, which you need before before starting your PhD after completing your master's. But this policy scraps that requirement. Again, there have been, it has been something of a controversial move, but overall, if you were to look at it, if there is flexibility in bachelor's as well as master's, and the added component of research option within master's, then scrapping MPhil does make sense, and it is not entirely a bad move, because globally many of the other countries have scrapped MPhil programs. They complete their masters with there would be option of with research or without research, but if it is completed with research, they continue it to PhD directly after masters. And in that scenario, it does talks about bringing the standard of Indian education system on par with the global standard, so that it is easy for people who study in India to be able to be on par with international standard. And similarly, it talks about making India an educational hub for people from across India who can come and join India to study. Now the third area and problematic area is that of the language issue. This policy talks about education in mother tongue, especially at school level. It talks about especially the early ECC period, the first 5 years. To be taught in mother tongue, and preferably after that till the 5+3, that is the first 8 years, to be taught in mother tongue before graduating to other languages, maybe English or any other language. But preferably, if there is an option, it will continue to provide education in mother tongue throughout the school education. This is again a very, very good move, because we know that education in one's mother tongue is something that has been scientifically proven to be beneficial and good for people, and it helps students easily pick up concepts, ideas, which it will be difficult for them if they were to learn it in some other language apart from their mother tongue. However, the problem with this language policy is that along with it comes the problematic aspect. This policy does talk a lot about Sanskrit language, and imposing Sanskrit language, offering it as on par with other languages. It has a 3-language formula. And it makes some conditions, few of which I'll just read out to you. You have 3-language formula. However, no language is made compulsory. 3-language formula, it is left up to the state government's decisions and students' decision to choose which language they want to choose. However, when they choose 3 languages, at least 2 out of those 3 languages must be Indian languages. Apart from that, it talks about offering Sanskrit as one of the languages in the school level as well as in higher education system, and making studying of Sanskrit is encouraged, and it talks about making Sanskrit universities. It talks about the teaching Sanskrit through Sanskrit by making Sanskrit easy to follow and understand. And this is another problematic aspect. As we know, India is not a country that has one single language, one single culture, one single religion. Rather, it is made up of many communities, whether they are linguistic communities, whether they are religious communities, whether they are cultural communities. To say any one language of India is a universal language of India is a very faulty proposition that must be resisted, that must be rejected by the people, that must political parties, students, teachers must exert their pressure on the government to scrap such a policy. Rather, given that there is already a 3-language formula, the option for students to pick up must be given. Naturally, whichever region of India they belong to, they will be studying their mother tongue, they will be studying the language of their state, and they should have the freedom to choose any other language. And given that the policy encourages learning of multiple language apart from the 3-language, there should be no fear on that head that students might not study languages. One big issue with that is it talks about learning even the foreign languages, but it neglects, it prefers some foreign languages over others. For example, it talks about Thai, Korean, German, etc. to learn. Nothing wrong with learning these languages, but the problem is that it feels that there is a deliberate attempt to leave out certain languages in preference of certain other languages. Like, for example, for Muslim community in India, Arabic is their religious language. Throughout the policy draft, you can see that there is a frequent reference to different international languages, even to the point that it talks about Hebrew language, but there is no mention of Arabic language. We know the Indian diaspora that lives in throughout the world. A considerable proportion of that lives in the Gulf region, where they interact with the Arabic speaking people, to deal with those people, and as even for the largest minority in India, that is Muslims, it sort of smacks of preferential treatment in the policy, that their language is being neglected in lieu of that. The problem here being that giving preference to any one language or neglecting any one language, both are very problematic positions. The right position which should have been taken would have been that the three-language formula or freedom of languages, encouragement to study any languages must be given. Beyond that, it should be left to the choice of these students to pick up. And like I said, it is not so much of a big deal, because the student would naturally want to learn their mother language. They might want to learn the language of their state, and they might want to learn English language, which is all helpful for them in the pursuit of their educational and academic as well as their career choices. It will be beneficial for them. Given that there is an encouragement to study other languages as well, this fear that it might or this force to study any particular language or to highlight any particular language is a problematic proposition. One good thing that the policy talks about is it talks about standardizing the Indian Sign Language, so that the students who have disabilities, they can be mainstreamed, especially people who have speech impairment. They can be able to have a standard form of Indian Sign Language that can be used across India. Similarly, to include students who are physically challenged or with special needs, they can be included. For them, textbooks in Braille, or having infrastructural facility for them. All this is being talked in the policy, which is a very welcome and good move. Coming now to another aspect, it talks about a centralized national. The previous policy had talked about one centralized control for all testing and assessment throughout India for the school education as well as the national level education. However, it has now been amended in this final draft to be recommendatory, as even CRT's suggestion was such that any such national framework should only be recommendatory in nature, and it should not be something that is made the sole agency to test, assess, and accredit students, but rather this thing and the right to conduct tests, etc., must be left to the state government, because education is a concurrent subject, meaning it is a joint responsibility of both state government as well as the union government, and any infringement by the union government would be against the federal structure of Indian Parliament. However, there are a number of other agencies like Rashtriya Shiksha Ayog, RSA, and a number of other agencies which are all very problematic, and hence these must not be empowered to the extent that they infringe about the state's right to do so. Even any such bodies should be only as a monetary body, as a body to frame frameworks, and that should be it. And one problematic aspect is that the education policy must any such bodies must not be under the direct command of any political post such as Prime Minister or Minister of Education, but rather they should be made up of technocrats, so that they are not sacrificed for political exigencies. As we know, any political party would come, they might have an agenda and might try to influence the conduct and the of the education in the country, but they should be allowed space that they continue doing their work in an efficient and professional manner. And of course, the political decisions must have a proper mechanism of transforming without directly controlling these bodies that would result in potential misuse of these organization. Another big change is that the Ministry of Human Resource Development will be renamed. In fact, it has been renamed as Ministry of Education, and the Union Minister for Human Resource Development will now be the Union Minister for Education. And this is again something of a reverse decision, because initially after independence it was Ministry of Education. The first Minister of Education was Maulana Abul Kalam Azad under Prime Minister Nehru, and in during Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi's period it was renamed as Ministry of Human Resource Development, and now it has been again reversed back to Ministry of Education. And another area that this policy talks is about vocational training. Last time there was a much emphasis of vocational training, and vocational training and education was offered as an alternate to continuous. But again, in this final draft, it has been dropped, and vocational education is being reshaped to be on par with all other streams of education, so that there is no talk of specific vocational education separated from academic education till +2. There is no talk, but after +2, there is a possibility of having bachelor courses in different vocational streams. That will be continued, and again, it is a welcome move, but something to be taken in caution, because if vocation is used as an excuse to shuffle and move students who might drop out of mainstream to be shifted to the vocational educational stream, that would be a very problematic notion. But if, however, this misbalance in the perception of vocational education, the policy does talk about people's perception of vocational education as something lesser than other streams. It talks about making change in that, so that people perceive. That is why till +2. In one way, till +2, some courses, all students would be encouraged to explore vocational courses, but no specific vocational courses as a separate stream will be given, but they will have an option to continue higher education in vocational courses. That of course will be focusing more on vocation and it would be given degrees. Similarly, one thing that I missed out with respect to school education is that in this 5+3+3+4 format, in the two things in fact I missed. One is that there will be no hard separation of streams. Students will have flexibility of stream. They can get to choose different subjects. Like currently we have, if you want to take science group, you have to take science group with some options, like with maths or biology or computer science. But if you were to take, say, arts stream, or you were to take commerce stream, there is a fixed separation of streams. This will no longer be applicable, but students can get to choose different, like you can take one science subject, one art subject, one commerce subject, and you can make your own this choice of that. Similarly, assessment of students will be not focused on board exam, but it will be a comprehensive and continuous assessment, and board exams will still be continued, but they will not be like now a final exam that will decide your future, but it will be one of the exams, and the policy talks about exams being conducted on a continuous and comprehensive basis and on a regular frequency, so that no one exam is taken as a main exam, in which like all the hype is built up, or even it talks about like the coaching class culture that is there. It wants to reduce that, which again is a very good move, and it is to be encouraged if it is implemented properly. However, I mean, that is the problem that remains if it is implemented properly. Another thing that the policy talks about, which is positive, is that it talks about inclusion of parents in the process. The previous draft of NEP 2019 did not include that. Many people, including CRT, had advocated, submitted its recommendation that parents must be made part of the school education process in form of SMCs, school management committees, and other fora. And this policy has included and accepted these suggestions, and have made parents an integral part of this system. The policy talks about a national assessment center that would set a parameter for assessment, so that there is a national level framework for assessment. The actual to conduct test and assessment that will be done by respective state bodies, but there will be a national standardization of these tests, and similarly there will be a national testing agency to standardize test for all university. Instead of different universities having different examination, the NTA, National Testing the proposed NTA, National Testing Agency, will have an examination, a standard examination. After writing that, a student can choose to take admission in any university in India, because all universities will now be bound by NTA's result. Another big area that this policy talks about is relating to the socio-economic disadvantaged groups. If you remember, the NEP 29 had used the terminology as under-representative groups, URGs. Many people had objected to that use, because it does not properly represent, it does not properly convey the problems that these groups are there. CRT submitted this recommendation that there be a revision, and this final NEP policy has revised that, and they have made it as socio-economically disadvantaged groups. And it talks extensively into dealing with how for making it this SCDGs into mainstream, and children with special needs, and how these people should be integrated. It does talk about increasing scholarships, fees, and making it simple, so that one access this thing in form of socioeconomic scholarships to the students of socioeconomically disadvantaged groups and all that. And another very important thing is that CRT had also recommended on this. CRT had recommended on this that students with alternate platforms, like religious schools, for like madrasas for Muslims, like dharamshalas for Buddhists and other communities. Students from those sections must have a bridge course, so that after finishing they are able to join the mainstream, and that policy has been incorporated in this final. That recommendation has been incorporated in this final policy. Apart from this, there is a major revision of teachers' education, and this is also something that has been a lot of discussion has happened since last year and before that also. That teachers' education in India is not up to the mark. There are in fact many teachers' education institutes in India which are being run commercially for the sake of you know. Money making and all that. To reduce this commercialization, there will be you know, a standard set across India that would help in you know, maintaining what defines teachers education, and including the format of teachers education such as B.Ed is being revised in many ways. One is that the B.Ed course now will be an integrated BS course. Integrated B.Ed course that could be 4 years, or people who finish the 3 or 4 years bachelor's, they can have 1 year B.Ed course. There are multiple options. Similarly, another way is that PhD students will now compulsorily be made to take teaching courses in either education, pedagogy, or you know, writing, etc., so that along with their PhD they are equipped whenever they join, if they so choose to join, they are able to be competent to teach in high institutes of higher education or in school education. So there is a major rehaul of teachers education, and in many ways, like there will be a continuous assessment of teachers, there will be a continuous monitoring of teachers, there will be an annual teachers upgradation training program, so that teachers are you know, made to be aware of the latest technologies, the latest developments, teaching pedagogical models, curriculum discussions, etc. And all these are positive things that are there in the system. With respect to commercialization, there is a mixed baggage in the policy on this subject. On one hand, it does talk about how policy is a public good nature of the education and how it must be done. On the other hand, it does encourage private participation, like participation of NGOs in school education, participation of philanthropists in education, you know, private higher educational institutes. And in one thing, however, they have made one provision, is that there will be strict regulation, but it is not clear how and in what form this strict regulation will be, beyond mentioning that there will be no arbitrary increase of fees. We know that how private sectors abuse you know, education for money making. It happens in so many different ways. One way is that it happens in, say, textbooks, it happens in textbook publications, and etc. It happens in fee structures, it happens in hospitals, fees, it happens in mess fees, it happens in donations, in so many ways. Some are related to school education, some are related to higher education. All these problems happen in that, but regulating all this, it's not talk, it merely talks about you know, regulating fee problems, like no arbitrary increasement of fee. But however, it also talks about recovering the cost from, if, when and where possible, without you know, disturbing the you know, students' interest of not making it a commercial venture. But how is this specifically possible? Specific you know, steps are not defined. In what way commercialization will be curtailed? Privatization, if it is allowed, how much and in what ways it will be allowed, it is not mentioned, beyond the fact that it will be encouraged, private sector, I mean, you know, to be allowed in. And again, they talk about bringing in foreign players in Indian education system. Obviously, when foreign players come, they would be coming specifically to make money out of India, and not merely to you know, provide affordable education system. And again, within India, the big question would be that who will be able to afford that education? Obviously, it is not possible for people from rural areas, people from socio-economically disadvantaged groups. These people will not be able to afford education in such institutes. So it raises very big question, to what extent is the government sincere in implementing these measures, and to what extent will it actually make difference on ground. Currently we have so many problems, so much corruption and commercialization takes place. Would that same thing continue? It looks very much possible, because there are no specific mechanisms to deal with these specific issues that come with privatization and commercialization in Indian education system. So apart from this, with respect to the governance of higher educational institution, again it's a very problematic area in this policy. Now institutes, higher educational institutes would be encouraged to be a university. The policy talks about laying down strict guidelines so that it has a holistic, comprehensive, multidisciplinary approach in which all streams, research will be encouraged, etc. All those things. But however, the conduct of such institute will be that they will be totally autonomous. They will be directed by a board of governors that will be how they will be appointed, on what base, it is not said. Beyond that, there should be eminent people in their own field, etc. These are very not very specific way of dodging the main question. For example, it does not talk about how the conduct of those of the higher educational institutions would be, from where and by whom will these eminent people will be selected for board of governors, and how much would they be allowed to have, and what about the democratic cultures within the campuses. It talks about allowing students developing their talents, allowing all their talents to go, etc., etc. But however, it does not talk a lot about the democratic environment of the campuses, in which democratic discussion, debate, democratic engagement, in which dissent, disagreement and discussion and discourse is possible. It is not at all making any scope for that. It seems as if very deliberately that part is left out, and it only solely talks about how talent should be encouraged. All these things are being talked in the policy. Apart from that, there are a number of other issues, such as in conduct of the department. What about the teaching staff? What about the non-teaching staff? What about the unionization of non-teaching staff and their interest? And what about how much of involvement of student representation would that there be in decision making of higher educational institution? All this the policy is very much silent about. Apart from this, there is a very specific area in which a section is dedicated to talking about promotion of Indian languages, arts and culture. Again, it talks about, say, Israel, it talks about Hebrew language and all that, but it chooses certain languages and focuses out certain languages, which raises alarm bells and questions. Similarly, it talks about Indian values and cultures, and when it talks about Indian values and cultures, it talks about values and cultures of one particular community. It does not say that India is an amalgamation of a plural plurality in essence. It is very much silence, and it is a very troubling aspect here. And again, it talks about, like, in that Sanskrit language being focused, Sanskrit universities being established, teaching Sanskrit, learning Sanskrit at higher education levels. Again, very problematic. when you are in higher education institute, students are adult enough to make their choices of what languages they want to study. All Indian languages must be encouraged. It is a very good suggestion, including but not limited to Sanskrit. However, to exclusively focus on any one language and to say that this one language is a representative of all India, or it is an that is a very problematic position to take, and it goes against the constitutional values in which all languages are given equal position. Like all languages in the eighth schedule of the Constitution are co-equals, meaning that no one language is more better than any other language from a constitutional point of view. All languages are Indian, official Indian languages, and they must be encouraged to continue that way. There is a mention of National Research Foundation, and previously it had problems because it talked about government allotting research projects, but now it has been scrapped. Many civil society players had raised this issue, including CRT, and we talked about not making this thing, not making research subject to government expediency, but rather it should be left free. And it is this time it has been revised so that to make it peer reviewed, which is at least comparatively better. But again, it begs the question when it talks about peer reviewed, who is this peer groups that will be reviewing? And connected to this, another issue of governance in higher education is that they talk about involving merit-based. It talks about merit-based appointments of competent people. That is true. I mean, to ensure that the quality of education is not adversely affected, you should ensure that, competent people are given tenures and posts. However, there should also be, because on one hand, you can't talk about socio-economically disadvantaged groups who have systematic hurdles in their path to achieving those positions, and on the other hand, talk solely about merit. And that is the whole reason why reservation was in first place included in the Constitution as an affirmative action to correct socio-historical mistakes that has been committed against different communities. To ensure that, we again need here also an affirmation of a reservation policy so that competent enough people from different sections are allowed to have a representation, so that we are able to achieve a balance in the system and allow people from different sections to come and join the mainstream, allow them the opportunity to join mainstream. Otherwise, as it has always happened, what would be the result is that the people who are already disadvantaged will not have the opportunity, and people who are already advantaged, who are in a privileged position, will keep having opportunities to increase more and more, further and further, whereas the people who are already marginalized would keep on being marginalized. So these are some of the major things that have been in the policy that I wanted to discuss. Apart from that, of course, it's an extensive document. I think it would take a lot more time if I were to go through every single sections and analyze it in detail about all the sections of the national education policy. Hopefully, CRT will shortly be bringing out a document on section by section analysis of this policy, which would, I hope, you would find it more useful and beneficial. But at the moment, in this talk, because of the time constraint, I would not be able to go through all that, and that is why I tried to just limit it to a few important sections and important areas of the NEP 2020. So majorly speaking, on overall, to give a final conclusion to this whole thing, this policy is a very good and very ambitious policy. However, how much of that would be practically implemented, and how much of this policy will be achieved, how much of this policy will actually succeed on ground, is entirely different question, because it depends on so many different factors. One factor is the sincerity of the government. Another is the political will of the government to actually undertake steps to ensure that this policy is translated as it is intended in letter. It is translated in spirit and translated on ground, to make it possible that this policy actually succeeds. This is an entirely different question. There are so many factors that go into that. Apart from that, there are a number of red flags that are there. One is that commercialization of in number of places there is scope for commercialization. One can understand that the government is having constraints and limitation in a country of such huge size such as India, with such huge population. It might not be possible for the government to go, and in such scenario to take help of the private sector. It is understandable. However, education is not a commodity for to be converted into profit as a private good, but it is a public good. It is for welfare of all citizens. In such a scenario, stringent regulation should be put in place to ensure that this privatization does not result in an abuse of the system, and it does not result in commercialization. Privatization is okay as long as it is not commercialized, but the moment privatization is not regularized, it can very easily degenerate into commercialization, which is what so far has been happening, and there are no safety guards in this current in the new policy to prevent that. Secondly, there is very clear saffronization attempt in the policy, because there is a very clear bias for a certain community, for a certain culture, for a certain language in the policy, which is against the constitutional values and ethos, because Constitution of India guarantees equality between all communities living in India, and privileging any one over any other is against Constitution. Similarly, in terms of equity, there is no clear-cut commitment. It talks about and in number of ways there are some good measures to change the situation of socio-economically disadvantaged groups. However, there is no clear-cut commitment to affirmative action that would actually ensure that these things happen. It talks about giving funds, it talks about giving scholarship, but the problems that we have in India and Indian society with respect to caste structure and etc. demands that we need to do more than. I mean, it can help somebody who is economically weak or economically disadvantaged. Scholarships etc. might help, but people who come from socially disadvantaged groups, it is not possible solely to change their situation through economic measures, but rather affirmative action such as reservation must be ensured, whether it is in form of seats for students, or it is form of employment for teachers from these sections. Unless and until that is done, it is not at all possible that different communities in India that are disadvantaged disadvantaged, socially disadvantaged, socio-historically disadvantaged and marginalized would be able to come into the mainstream on par with everyone else. And lastly, one major area of problem that this is having, again, centralization. Although to be fair, they have reduced it compared to the proposed NEP in 2019. The level of centralization that it had, it has been toned down and reduced a lot in this section, but still it needs to be the delineation should be very clearly defined, because India, as we know, is a federal country. It's a union of states, and education in particular is a concurrent subject, a subject that is equal responsibility between the state governments as well as the union government. And in that respect, the authority of union government should not infringe upon the state's autonomy, but rather it should be more in terms of advisory capacity. It should be more of regulatory capacity in framing standards, etc., and the rest should be given to state. And even in these things, all states, no matter their size, any other consideration, must be given equal space in the decision making process of these bodies. And again, another big problem is that these bodies should not be under direct political control, because this would make education be a plaything in the hands of politicians, instead of making it something that is done for the benefit of all citizens with long-term vision. It should happen. All these things would be seriously affected. So, in brief, these are the issues, and these were the issues and problems, and the positive aspects as well of the new national education policy 2020. We sincerely hope that the amount of ambition that is being shown in the NEP actually translates on ground, and only then, like, India would be able to transform. Like I said in the beginning, education is, as any robust education system, must have universal access, equitably universal access, and a guarantee of quality education for all. And unless and until that is ensured, no education system can be called as a success. So we hope that this NEP makes that possible, so that education actually becomes a tool for social transformation, a tool that transforms the lives of individuals and community for a better future, instead of making it instead of failing education or using it as a tool for politics. So this, in brief, was the analysis. There are a few questions that have been shared by the audience. I would just quickly try to respond to them all, and we will conclude. Is there any mandate? Is a study of Sanskrit language mandatory? No. Sanskrit is very heavily promoted in this policy, but it is not mandatory, thankfully, but it is encouraged, which is still a problematic, as I had already explained. The second question is, what about medieval history and British India? Out of subject? No, the policy does not talk about curriculum. Curriculum will be left, school education curriculum will be left to NCERT and the SSCERTs, that is the National Curriculum Framing Body and the State Curriculum Framing Body. They will be deciding on the curriculum specifics. The policy is only a guidelines into how to be done, which it is. It does not talk specifically about these things. As far as that, I think near to your question, the thing would be that it talks about encouraging Indian values, Indian culture, Indian history, and all those things. The question is that what is being meant by Indian history? Does that mean a history from a particular perspective? Is it a history of one particular particular community? Is it an interpretation or a perspective of a particular community about history? If that is so, it is very much problematic and it is against the Constitution of India. If it is just about all communities in India, everyone's perspective, then there is no problem. However, given how in different places the wordings that come with Indian population, it betrays that it is talking about one particular community, and that is why it is a very problematic aspect. Just to be clear, Indian values and ethos and cultures must be inculcated, because we are all Indians, we are all proudly Indians, and we belong to this land, and we are from here, and every citizen of India is a citizen of this country, equally Indian along with the rest of us. The problem is that for some people, some other people are not equally Indian. They are foreigners, they are this, that, and that is why. And all this discourse gains legitimacy from such kind of interpretations and understanding, and that is why we have to flag down these interpretations and not allow them to have any influence in education system. Rather, a proper and correct understanding and interpretation of India, that is an India for all, and India of all communities that belong to this country, must be maintained. Do you think NEP 2020 will practically work out in current, on ground in current scenario? I think I answered this question. It is an ambitious project. Let's hope that it does fulfill that. And the final question, NEP doesn't make mandatory spending of 6%. I mean, it does not make it mandatory, it recommends. And that is why it is, this is not new. Every policy, every previous policy has also talked about 6-7% GDP spending. This policy also talks about, and that is the problem. It talks about it. We know since the last 70 plus years, it has not actually been implemented. The government spending has been very less. As we know, currently our education spending on education is, I think, if I'm not mistaken, in the last financial year, it was 1.7% only of GDP, and that is a very, very, very low, amount to be spent on education. And it is not possible to make the future of India, those people who talk about future of India, how can future of India be bright if such kind of if these kind of things are done? How is it possible that the future of India is transformed? So yeah, the policy does not make any clarification. I think I talked about this earlier, how that 6% of spending on GDP, two things: how it will be spent, and a compulsory mandatory spending of 6% pegged to GDP. The difference is that when you say 6% of GDP and pegged to GDP, is that when GDP grows, there must be a corresponding increase in spending on education. So on one hand, we can say, growth of GDP is there, but the corresponding increase is not being maintained. That is problematic. So the policy is unfortunately quiet on that. The second question is that NEP 2020 recommends various vocational courses, wants to maintain PR, develops infrastructure, but it is destroying public sector schools by privatization and reducing teacher vacancies. Yes, it is a very much problematic. I mean, it is contradictory in certain ways, because on one hand, as you said, it talks about vocational courses. However, it does, unlike the NEP 2019, in the final thing, it has been revised. The previous one talked about vocational courses parallel and as an exit point for students. But this policy does not talk about it as an exit point, but rather it talks about it as on par with this thing. It talks about increasing PTR. It talks about increasing teacher vacancies and bringing in more teachers into school. However, yes, on the same time, it privatization, it talks and encourages privatization, and we know practically governments, whether it is the union government or the state governments, have been systematically destroying the public school system, the neighborhood school system, and allowing low-cost private schools to as a form of business to come up. Various political party, various politicians, many of them usually have interest in having these kind of school systems, their business interests, etc., and otherwise also the funders of the party and different people, and that has led to a decline and decline of public schooling system in India, which is a very problematic aspect, and again, it should not happen. It should not be done, and we are facing this problem. And policy is ambivalent. It is on one hand talking about all these things, same hand encouraging privatization. And final exam. What about board exams at 5th and 8th grades? Board exams will not be conducted at 5th and 8th grades, but an assessment exam of different of a kind will be taken at 5th and 8th grades, so that, and okay, I think I forgot to mention one thing, and that is there will be a continuous assessment of all academic. There will be a national body that will follow every single student in a continuous assessment of students, that will talk about that will monitor and take their progress into consideration throughout their school and into their higher education. And even in higher education, you have flexibility, so that if you plan to take, say for example, somebody wants to after 2 years of their bachelor's, they are not able to continue for some reason, so they, after, like I said, after 2 years they will be given a diploma, but that credits will be maintained, will be safe. I think, if I'm not mistaken, academic bank for credits, it is called in the policy draft, if I am not mistaken, that will maintain that. So say in future you want to continue from that point, it will be possible for a student to do so. Same thing with the school education. Say after first 5 years, or after 5 plus 3 years, or after 5 plus 3 plus 3 years, at every point there will be an assessment, so that a student's progress is monitored, maintained, and again, the form of assessment will be changed, like I explained in detail previously. I think I will not go into that now again, so that the form of assessment will not be board exam as we know today. Even for 10th and 12th, board exams will be there, but the form will not be like now. They want to reduce the coaching culture of which the current board exam encourages, and instead make it as a continuous and comprehensive assessment, so that and they also talking about taking test at a shorter interval for shorter period of study. Like right now we know at school level, like if they take if it is one, they usually have an annual exam that tests the whole year. So instead of that, they're encouraging something like a semester system or any other like terminal system, so that what you teach in one term is done, you move forward, and that too is not only tested in one exam format, but rather a continuous and comprehensive assessment format. The policy does not clearly spell out how it is done. It just talks about specific rules to be framed. It talks about different bodies who will, at school level also, it is dividing the responsibility. Like right now you have a Department of Education that is totally managing everything, but the policy talks about dividing this work into different so that the Department of Education will be will play a monetary role. The Directorate of Education will play the operational role, and the state, standardizes state school standardization authority (SSSA) will play the standardization role. What would be the criteria for examination, assessment, etc. And the SCERTs will play the academic role, framing the role. So all this work would be divided and given to these different bodies to do. And in same way for higher education also, there are different bodies that would be framed, like for example the National Testing Agency, the National Assessment Center, and and a number of other bodies, that is NPST, NCTE. All these will be, the role and work will be divided and given to them to frame, assess, and take in all this to basically work out this in a streamlined manner, so that this thing works out. For higher education, by the way, the regularization of higher education, the proposed Higher Education Council of India will be made. That will have 4 different branches that will be vertically parallelly working on different areas. That is with respect to regularization, accreditation, funding, and academic standardization. So they within a Higher Education Council of India, these 4, there will be different bodies that will work under the HECI, and they will focus on every aspect, and they will undertake all this work. And one of which is, like I said, the National Research Foundation of India. And one thing about National Research Foundation that I forgot to mention, previously in NEP 2019, they talked about making National Research Foundation as the sole body, but there was severe backlash on that, because making one sole body, and that too they had proposed it will projects would be approved, research projects will be approved by the government, which is again, we know, very dangerous thing to do. So CRT included, many people recommended against this, and now the government has revised it, that it says like UGC and different agencies, the different research agencies in India, all of them will continue to fund research, give grants, everything, but along with that, the NSR will also be the main institute, and it will work in coordination with all these other bodies, so that it is more streamlined and functions in a better manner. So I think the questions have ended. So I think I will conclude here. Like I said, the NEP is a very, to conclude in a few sentences, I would say the National Education Policy 2020 is a very ambitious project. If it is implemented properly, would be something that is very good for the future of India. However, it does have certain red flags in it that are problematic, that are divisive. Chiefly, it does not reiterate affirmative action. It does not, it has a very biased stance with respect to Indian values and culture for a particular community, not an inclusive idea. And similarly, a contradictory position on commercialization, and the danger of centralization is there. Otherwise, on whole, it is something that can be good for the future of India if it is taken properly and implemented properly, and the negative aspects are taken out. Then it can be something that can be very useful and beneficial for the future of India. And thank you all very much for joining on this talk and being here in this talk. And we will conclude here. Thank you very much, and hopefully soon, as I said, we will be the CERT Center for Educational Research and Training will be coming out with a document that in-depth with an in-depth analysis of the whole document, so that it is much easier, so that it can be more useful for people who want to go more into details. They can go for every single aspect of the whole document, and analysis can be presented, which can be accessed through different social media, and it will be shared soon. Thank you all very much, and good evening.